while everybody's getting that, I wanted to let you know that I grew up in a household where we didn't have a lot of sweets. My parents were the original health food nuts. They were in no way hippies. They were Goldwater Republicans, but they were big on, we were the first people to have brown bread and raw mushrooms in our salad in 1967. So we did not, we seldom had dessert at dinner. And as I look back, I realized that my parents were not just concerned about our health, but frankly, we didn't have money for that kind of thing. We didn't ever have processed foods. And this was a terrible, terrible, terrible burden on me when I went to school, because you can't get anything if all you've got to trade is a meatball sandwich, right? So in 4th grade, I can tell you this now because my mother's long gone and she won't know. My favorite 4th grade friend was Kathy because she loved meatloaf sandwiches. I don't even know who eats meatloaf sandwiches, but I didn't. And when my mom would say, well, there's a whole group of meatloaf. Next time my mother makes me a meatloaf sandwich, I'm coming to your house. Because Kathy would trade me her peanut butter sandwich and a bag of chips for my meatloaf sandwich. And no, we didn't get chips either. I didn't have an Oreo till I was in my 20s. But that's because my mom made homemade cookies. I still don't like Oreos. But at Halloween, all bets were off. This is not an actual picture of me, but it could have been. My mom would, look through the haul and make sure there wasn't anything really awful in there and then hand it back to us, and we were on our own, right? And mine was gone in 2 days. My sister, she's like this, and I don't care who knows it. If she was here, I'd say it anyway. She'd have a few pieces every day until at the end of the month, she still had some. And yes, I stole some of hers. I'll just tell you, it's true. And then she would gloat that she had gotten more than I did, but really all she did was eat it at a more reasonable pace. Anyway, in the spirit of the weekend of fun and sweets, I thought we might look at how the Bible uses the idea of sweetness to uplift us, to draw us closer to God, and to give us hope. Proverbs 27:9 says, "Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel." The Bible is a very rich piece of literature. And you may have taken a class called The Bible as Literature. And if you didn't, that's too bad, because in Western civilization, pretty much anything from the Mediterranean through to the New World, anything that isn't India or the Far East, our whole civilization's art, culture, literature, music is riddled with biblical allusions and biblical understanding. So if you don't know anything about the Bible, you'll miss a lot in art, literature, and music. For me, and probably for you too, the Bible is, of course, a lot more than a piece of great literature. And I'm a fan of great literature. It's my primary source for seeking understanding of myself, understanding of God, the deepest truths of my soul, and the deepest longings of my life. And the Bible does such a good job at feeding my soul and my spirit, and I think it's in no small part because it is a great piece of literature. Because great literature reaches all of our senses. It reaches for our hearts and our minds, for our bodies and our souls. Literature for the spiritual journey shapes us by reaching for all of us: mind, body, soul, spirit, and all 5 senses. The Bible has something for all of your senses. So this is what we're going to do right now. Get out your piece of candy. Well, I don't need one. This may be the only time you'll ever have You'll ever have someone ask you to eat chocolate spiritually. We're going to eat chocolate spiritually right now. Okay? And it's fine if you don't want to play. If you think this is silly, just don't. That's fine. Just don't laugh at other people. That's the only rule. So first, feel. Just feel this. You can even close your eyes. And as you unwrap it, you can feel that there's some paper If you have one of those little nut packets, they're really hard to open and very annoying. And then, let's see, mine has another wrapper around it, and I can feel the foil. Listen, you can hear there's noise. I'll stop talking for a minute, and you'll hear everybody unwrapping their chocolate. Okay, ball up the wrapper. Right? And then look, have a look. See what you see. If this was dark, you'd know it's probably dark chocolate. Mine has little bits of something. A lighter chocolate is going to promises something a little bit creamy. Now smell. It smells like chocolate. Unless you don't have chocolate and it smells like something else. You know, your memory part of your brain is almost directly linked to your olfactory senses. So smell and memory are really, really related. Smell that again. Does it bring up a memory? Chocolate chip cookies at home? That Halloween that the boy you liked wanted to go with you? And now, what you've been waiting for, pop it in your mouth. And as you do, notice the feeling, the smell, and the memories. And again, just like last week, I don't want to take anything home. So at the end of the day, if you thought that was really great, you just pick yourself up some more. I think the Bible speaks to our need for hope and is a source of hope and gives us ways to find hope and have hope restored. And biblical sweetness does this. The Bible uses the word sweet and sweetness in a very different way. And also it's Halloween, and I'm just going to make something spiritual out of candy if I possibly can. So tomorrow, when you start digging into your candy, unless you've already started, and that's okay too, I want you to remember as you smell the chocolate and you touch these things, as your senses are enlivened, remember what we've talked about today, that we're igniting a spiritual spark today and kindling a fire of hope. Proverbs 16 says, gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Most of the time when we say we'll pray for someone, or when we ask for prayers, what we're really asking for or offering is love and support. It's not the words of the prayer. It's the love and support. If we're going through a hard time, a gesture or even a word, as Proverbs says, is a kindness that gives us a glimmer, just a spark. Hopelessness, despair, may well be the worst human emotion any of us will ever experience. And in a sense of hopelessness, hopelessness is hopeless. And all it takes is a spark to move us away from complete hopelessness. And from that tiny spark, offered by the graceful, loving word of a friend, a fire of hope can be kindled. Belonging to a community of love and support, and that's what the faith community is. Belonging to a community of love and support gives us the hope to hope. It ignites the spark. It's just a spark, but it's a start. Psalm 119 in verse 103 and 104 says, how sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. I gain understanding from your precepts. Therefore, I hate every wrong path. And Proverbs 24 says, eat honey, my son, for it's good. Honey from the comb is sweet to your taste. Know also that wisdom is like honey for you. If you find it, there's a future hope for you. Wisdom is sweetness. If you find wisdom, there's a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. A spark is only a beginning, but attending to our God connection kindles the fire of hope. Seeking God, seeking spiritual wisdom kindles this fire. When we're in a hard place, that sweet word or gesture from a friend can ignite the spark that, combined with our desire to be near God and our connection to God and our personal spiritual practices, kindles a warming fire that draws us toward the hope of God's grace, or restores us to the guidance of God's Spirit. Attending to our God connection, your God connection, kindles the fires of hope that warm us and light our way. The other thing that happens with hope is when we give and receive compassion, hope is restored where previously there was hopelessness. I think that right there is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the sweetness, as the biblical image would have it, is so much more powerful than our common understanding. In our regular way of talking about sweetness, sweetness is almost a put down. If you call somebody sweet, there's an overtone of simpering and an undertone of shallowness, but not in the Bible. That's not what the Bible means when it talks about sweetness. I don't need to tell you that our mothers and fathers of the faith in ancient times who bequeathed us these stories didn't have diets full of sugar. They weren't worried about whether or not they were going to eat too much sugar on Halloween. They were worried about whether or not there would be enough to eat at all. And so when the Bible uses imagery about sweetness, it's really talking about abundance. The only sweet they would have been ripe fruit at harvest time and honey when it could be found and if you could afford it. So sweetness is often referred to in the Bible as kind of a taste of heaven, because heaven is where you don't ever have to worry about malnutrition or starvation again. At the core of the biblical message, you will have enough, and that is the sweetest word there is. Sweetness is a symbol, an image, a sign of abundance. And we can hope for abundance. A lot of the stories Jesus told and the stories we have about his actions and life are stories where there's food and sweetness. Food in sweet abundance, which really, really matters a lot. I want to read to you from the 6th chapter of John. This will be a familiar story. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he'd performed by healing the sick. So now there's a spark of hope that's been ignited. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. And when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" And Philip said, "I don't know, maybe Taco Bell." Is this a test question? That's what it says. It says Jesus asked this only to test him, for Jesus already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "Well, it would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for everyone to even have a bite." Another of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Well, here's a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but I don't know what good that's going to do." And Jesus said, "Have all the people sit down." There's plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down, about 5,000 men, not counting women and children. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted, and he did the same with the fish. And when they'd all had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Don't let anything go to waste." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had just eaten. Now, this feeding narrative is the only story about Jesus that is in all 4 Gospels. So it's a big one, because everything that matters about Jesus is in this story. Everything that matters about Jesus is in this story. Love. Jesus' heart is moved. This comes from his cultivation of his deep connection with God. Jesus is God-centered, which means he also must be people-centered. Compassion. Jesus sees their needs. They're not just a logistical problem. He's not just concerned about crowd control. He sees people and justice. Love, compassion, justice. These are the poor gathered around him. They're poor because the system they live in crushes them. They are literally starving, some of them slowly, because of the system. They never have quite enough to eat. So this story presents a paralyzing situation. We can identify with that, can't we? And one of the disciples at least throws up his hands in despair, and who doesn't do that? There's overwhelming need and so few resources. It looks hopeless. And then surveying the great crowd, Jesus asks a question that absolutely tests the limit of his disciples. He says to us, where are we going to get bread for all these people? Maybe, he said, where are we going to get burritos for all these people? It's possible. And then you know what happens next. There's a miracle and everybody gets fed and there are leftovers. And finally, the people who never quite have enough to eat have more than enough to eat. And take a breath here, because I'm going to say something that might upend your idea, but I don't think the bread and the fish are the miracle. I don't think the bread and the fish are the miracle. I think Jesus' compelling power to love, to see people, to see more than just a crowd of people. He sees their need. That's the miracle. I think Jesus' ability to instill compassion in his followers. That's what happens to us when we follow Jesus. We become filled with compassion, whether we kind of want to or not. And we get to watch as Jesus moves the disciples in this story from hopelessness and despair to hope. The compassion is the miracle. The love, the compassion, and Jesus' invitation to us to pursue justice is the miracle, especially in a world where the deck is stacked against most folks. That people who have little reason to hope, when they come into the sphere of Jesus, yes, they get all the bread and fish they can eat, but it's the love, the compassion, and the commitment to justice that's the miracle. That is Jesus' miracle. When he asks the question, his answer to his disciples is, go ahead, start with what you have, and I'll be in it. Start with what you have, and I'll be in it. The love, the compassion, the justice, they add up to hope, and that is the miracle. And these things, love, compassion, justice, over and over, the Bible tells us this is where the sweetness of life resides. We don't have to know how to multiply bread or walk on water or turn water into wine. When Jesus tells us in John 14:12 that we will do greater things than he did, he means that we too have the sweetness of love, compassion, and justice so that we ourselves may live in hope when we might otherwise be hopeless. And we may bring hope to people who would otherwise be hopeless. We have everything we need to live out miracles right here on the corner of Commonwealth and Pomona, and on your street too. Well, that's a lot to make out of a piece of candy. So I'll just leave you with this. From Song of Songs, there's loads of sweetness metaphors for romantic and sexual love in the Song of Songs. It's not family fare, but it's a great way to remember how sustaining love can be. The second verse of that book says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine." The sweetness of love sustains hope. Hope arises with just a spark. It's kindled into warmth and light. And it is sustained by love and compassion. Proverbs 27 says, "Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel." Miracles start with just one kind word that sparks hope in our season of darkness. And in the face of all of our times of frustration and helplessness and hopelessness, support from a friend, life in community, And the miracle of love, compassion, and justice restores our hope. And that is quite enough miracle for us today, and a reason to be thankful. Amen?